So welcome to the fifth video in the Cooking the Books series. And really what I've been trying to do throughout this series is just give you a flavour for some of the ways that accounts can mislead investors. And by the way, if you want to read more about some of these techniques and some other ones besides, maybe take a look at a book by Terry Smith called Accounting for Growth. And that'll give you a bit more detail on some of these techniques and also some sort of red flags to watch out for. Anyway, so what's the fifth Cooking the Books problem area? Well, it relates to my last video. My last video dealt with the problem of brand names and intangible assets and what happens to footballers and licenses on balance sheets. In this video, similar problem. Basically, if you're looking at certain sectors, and one or two spring to mind, like the biotech sector, for example, you need to be a little bit careful with what the company's done with what are called research and development costs. Okay? Now, the accounting standards have tightened up a bit in this area. The accountants have got their act together, but nonetheless, you still need to be a little bit careful with how companies treat costs where there might be a long-term benefit. Because that's the key, you see. In a set of accounts, you've got a balance sheet, that's a kind of statement of assets, and some of those assets could be basically things stored up that will give the firm a long-term benefit. And some of those can include like costs incurred, believe it or not, like sort of development costs, for example, developing products to get them to market and so on. And profit and loss accounts are where you record income and expenses. All right, so here's the point. All right, here's the point. Imagine I spend, let's say 100 million developing a product. All right, so I've got past the stage as an innovative company of pure speculative research that could go nowhere or could go somewhere. Okay, I've passed that stage. All right, I'm into the specific development of a product. Could be a drug, for example, that's going to bring in lots of revenue in the future. All right, now you might be thinking, well, presumably, Tim, as you spend money, you just bung it through the profit and loss account as a cost. You know, so you're going to be producing your profit and loss account, P&L account, record of income and expenditure, and you might say, well, you know, that's just a 100 million hit to profits every year, isn't it? If you keep spending that every year. Not necessarily. See, because the company might be able to persuade its accountants and auditors that actually there's a long-term benefit in this money being spent. Okay? Not right away, but once these tablets are out and being sold and distributed, loads of revenue is going to be coming back in. So wouldn't it make more sense to defer the hit to profits for when all the revenue comes through the profit and loss account when you actually start selling the thing that you're developing right now? Okay? Now, if that's the case, the company can make an argument for saying these development costs, right, actually go into the balance sheet as a £100 million asset. Now, those of you watching internationally, it will depend a little bit which accounting standard you're following here, but bear with me. You can make a case, and this is true of any expenditure actually, it's not just development costs related to pharmaceutical biotech type expenditure. Any company spending money that might bring in a benefit in the future can make this argument. Shouldn't we lock it up on the balance sheet as an asset for now, wait until we get the revenue through from selling whatever it is we're developing, and then release this asset as a cost into the profit and loss account using something I cover in another video called amortization or depreciation when the revenue comes through. And the argument for doing that is that way you match up in the profit and loss account the revenue with the cost, because otherwise you'll just have a profit and loss account going cost, develop, and then suddenly bing, all the revenue comes flooding in with no costs. That'll make your profit profile look a bit weird. This way, you lock up the costs in the balance sheet, store them if you like, and then release them to profits against revenue. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's all very interesting and scientific, but so what? Well, the point is this. Again, as an investor, you're trying to compare two companies in the same sector, or you're trying to get a feel for a sector average, okay? It's not necessarily that easy because companies don't make exactly the same decisions on what type of expenditure goes here as opposed to here, and exactly when it goes here as opposed to here. And even once they've locked up the money in the balance sheet, when they release it against profits, over what period. These are all decisions, judgments that the directors have to make. Okay, so it's yet another reason to be a little bit wary, because, let me put it this way, if a company wants to protect its profit and loss account early on, it will try and lock up costs in the balance sheet and keep them out of here. But if you get a new finance director in who's thinking, well, for the first 3 or 4 years, I'll get a bit of leeway about performance, he might decide to dump these type of costs against profits immediately. Sounds a bit counterintuitive, but he'll say, let's sweep as much cost into the profit and loss account now as we can get away with, because then later we won't have to worry about it. Yeah? So can you see that there can be a temptation to play this game either way, depending on what the finance director is trying to achieve and what he wants the profit and loss account to look at. Is it a benefit to defer costs? You might say yes, but actually no, if you're new on the board of the company and you don't mind dumping a few costs in the profit and loss account while you're in your kind of grace period. Yeah? So, as an investor in something like pharma or biotech and plenty of other sectors besides, you do need to be alert to this choice. You need to maybe have a look at the accounting policies note. That sounds dreadful. Note 1 in a set of financial statements will reveal what sort of policy the company adopts. And beyond that, if you're thinking, is there a quicker way to kind of get around this problem? Well, once again, as I've suggested in previous videos, if you're not sure the profit and loss account is a reliable guide to what's going on, your best bet is to go to the cash flow statement, where at least you'll get a fairly consistent pattern. As costs come through, they're dumped in the cash flow statement. Okay, I'm not saying that I'll give you the best overall long-term picture if the finance director is doing his best to match costs and revenues, but if in doubt, cash flow and free cash flow in particular, which I deal with in a video called The Number the Directors Don't Want You to Find, can be a better bet and can certainly be a useful backup to what's coming through the profit and loss account. Thanks for watching.